Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. Today's video is the first of a series of videos in which we will be looking at the witness testimony that is being provided in Johnny Depp's libel case in the UK. As you all know, Johnny has spent pretty much an entire week testifying in his own case, and the reason that I held off on making a video until this point is because I wanted to wait until more witnesses have testified, because really when it comes to these cases, Johnny's words in the eyes of the court are not enough, and the strength of the case comes from supporting witness testimony. These series of videos will not just simply be summaries or recaps of the events of the trial. I've seen many other channels doing that, so I'm sure you can watch them and get the summaries that you are after. The point of these videos is to look at how the witnesses performed on the stand, whether their evidence was strong and consistent, and whether the opposing side, NGN, was able to successfully poke holes in their evidence and diminish from their credibility. We will also be looking at the importance of re-examination as conducted by Mr. Sherborne throughout this trial so far. Just a quick explanation before we get into the nitty-gritty of this video. There is an order in which witnesses are questioned during trial. So first, there is the examination phase, where the witness is questioned by the lawyer of the party that they are testifying for. Then there is cross-examination, where they are questioned by the opposing side. And then, if necessary, the lawyer who examined them initially will then re-examine them to re-establish their credibility and to basically clean up any mess that the opposing side could have caused during their cross-examination. Alright, starting off with Johnny Depp himself. Now, as I said, Johnny spent an entire week pretty much testifying, so while I did go through each and every day's transcript, I won't be going through his testimony in detail because it is just far too much. But I will be posting the link to Nick Wallace's website where I've acquired all of these transcripts and statements from. So if you are looking for a good read, I definitely recommend them. Now, I do want to say that there are certain types of witnesses that judges like and certain types of witnesses that judges do not like. Judges like witnesses who are calm and collected and respectful and polite and concise, and most importantly, non-argumentative. So judges don't like it when a witness starts verbally sparring with the lawyer who is most usually cross-examining them. Judges tend to like witnesses who are not fanciful and very exaggerated in their delivery, which of course doesn't mean that a witness can't be emotional. So if a witness cries as they relive the trauma that they've been going through, that's not a bad thing, unless of course they're faking it. And usually judges are very good at seeing through witnesses and determining whether they're being honest or not, purely based on studying their body language. And that is one thing that judges definitely do in the courtroom. They will study the witness like a hawk. And they're writing notes as well. They're taking down lots of notes while all this is going on. Johnny is overall a good witness. He is very respectful. His answers are to the point for the most part. In an effort to explain himself, sometimes he does kind of not go off on a tangent, but he does tend to go on and on sometimes. But in general, he's respectful. He's very witty and he's very sharp. Sometimes if the wittiness extends to snarkiness or sarcasm, which Johnny is also prone to, judges wouldn't necessarily like that. Now, of course, judges are human and they don't all have the same criteria. They're not all going to be annoyed by snarkiness or wittiness. I'm just saying in general, judges like a very clean, neutral, vanilla delivery with no added, embellishments or attitude. Now, that's not to say that Johnny has an attitude. He can be very snarky with Sasha Wass, who is the lawyer for the opposing side. In terms of his sharpness, he's very on point. He knows exactly what he's saying, to the point where sometimes if Wass was really trying to manipulate the evidence and try to make him look bad, Johnny would actually take the role of a lawyer sometimes and refer the judge to a part of the evidence that shows that Wass is being selective. So she's cherry picking things to make him look bad. And then Johnny would redirect the judge to the context and clarify that actually she's cherry picking. This is what actually happened. And this didn't happen often, but when it did, the judge did tell Johnny, I appreciate that you have redirected me to inform me of the context. However, he did find himself in a couple of sticky points. The first sticky point, or the first little rough spot, was in relation to his allegation that Amber withheld medication from him during his detox in the Bahamas in 2014. The defense was very quick to point out that Amber was given strict instructions as to when she can give Johnny his medication. So they used a specific scenario as an example where at 3:15, Johnny was really feeling his withdrawal symptoms coming on, and he felt that he needed his medication right at that moment. But then Amber was instructed by Nurse Debbie Lloyd to give him that medication at 4 p.m. So Amber would look at the time and tell him, no, you have to wait till 4. So the defense asked him, is this what you meant by her withholding medicine from you? And he said yes. So if you read his statement just on the face of it without this context, it did look like she was just withholding medicine from him for the heck of it. But then the defense was very quick to point out that she was merely following instructions from a medical professional. Now, this isn't the worst thing in the world for Johnny because it's not about the physical abuse allegations. It's about a side issue of Amber's alleged cruelty. But it did show the judge that Johnny may have a tendency to exaggerate. Another area in which the defense poked holes in Johnny's evidence was in relation to the incident that transpired on the 15th of December 2015, so the fight that was right before the James Corden show. In all of Johnny's written statements, he never once mentioned that he accidentally headbutted Amber. He just completely denied ever hitting her or making any physical contact with her in an aggressive manner. In his testimony during the trial, he did concede that the headbutt was accidental, and basically he conceded that it did take place. So the defense jumped on that and hackled him about why he didn't bother mentioning this in any of his witness statements. Because for this case, I'm pretty sure he has 3. And the judge agreed with the defense and asked Johnny why he never bothered to add this to his witness statements or submit an additional statement to address this issue. Now, this is where Johnny did poorly. He said, well, I didn't really write the statements. My lawyers did. I just gave them all of my information and they decided what to include in the statement, which is true, by the way. This is how it works. There are a lot of times when witnesses will come to lawyers and they give us so much information and we have to always steer them back in the right direction and tell them, let's focus on what's relevant here. But of course, an accidental headbutt is not an irrelevant point in this case. Johnny was further questioned about why he didn't review the witness statements before signing them. And he said he did, but it was just so much information overload, that it just didn't register in his mind that the accidental headbutt was left out. So it is a very viable explanation that Johnny just didn't realize that it was left out. But again, it kind of showed the judge that maybe they're leaving things out on purpose. But Mr. Sherborne, once cross-examination was over, re-examined Johnny to re-establish his credibility, which is what excellent lawyers do. I've seen cases and I've been involved in cases where lawyers had every opportunity to re-examine their witness, to re-establish their credibility in the eyes of the judge or the jury, and they didn't do it. And they lost their case because of it. So re-examination is so important, and Mr. Sherborne is excellent. I know I've said this in the beginning, but he comes in now and he reestablishes Johnny's credibility by questioning him about the nurse who examined Amber on the 17th of December, so 2 days after the incident. And that nurse stated that she did not see any bruises or injuries on Amber, apart from a minor bleeding lip. Her lower lip was apparently bleeding when the nurse came in to talk to her. But then Mr. Sherborne asked Johnny about the state of Amber's lips generally. And Johnny explained that Amber's lips are always very dry and constantly picked at the dry skin. Mr. Sherborne then asked him, and what would that usually result in? And Johnny responded, her lip would bleed, as any part of skin naturally would if you pull at the scab. So in my opinion, that greatly reestablished Johnny's credibility in the eyes of the judge, because it took away from that nasty little sticky point that the judge was left with and redirected the judge to the main point of the issue, which is Amber was never injured that day. Even a nurse stated that. But overall, Johnny was steadfast in his delivery. He stuck to his guns. He was consistent and he did not waver. So overall, he did an excellent job as a witness in my humble yet professional opinion. The next to testify is Officer Melissa SAENZ. I think that's how you pronounce her surname. And she was one of the 2 police officers who responded to the 911 call that was placed on the 21st of May 2016. Now, I discuss Officer SAENZ's evidence in great detail in part 2 of my rebuttal of Amber Heard's evidence video, so I won't be rehashing any of that here. I will remind everyone who's watching, though, that Officer SAENZ is a trained domestic violence officer, and that when she saw Amber that night, she observed no injuries whatsoever and no damage to the property whatsoever. Her performance as a witness during the trial was excellent. She was extremely consistent with the evidence that she initially gave in 2016. Obviously, the fact that she is completely impartial with no personal connections to either party, and the fact that she is a trained domestic violence police officer greatly contributed to her credibility in the eyes of the court. The defendants knew that she was a great asset to Johnny's team because Was really tried to play dirty with this one. She tried to insinuate basically that Officer SAENZ was not necessarily taking Amber's case seriously and that she wasn't paying enough attention and that Amber was indeed bruised and injured, but Officer SAENZ either didn't notice or was corrupt in some way and didn't include it in her report. And of course, Officer SAENZ steadfastly denied every single one of these insinuations. She stuck to her evidence and maintained what she saw was the truth. The defense went as far as to suggest that one of Johnny Depp's security guards, Sean Bett, used to be an LAPD officer and therefore somehow influenced the investigation. Officer SAENZ's response to that was that she'd never even heard of Sean Bett and knows nothing about him. All right, next we're moving on to Stephen, and I'm gonna say Deuters because I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. I'm just using Reuters, the news organization, as a guide. Please forgive me if it's Deuters or something, but I'm just gonna refer to him as Stephen. In Stephen's written statement, he completely denies all of the allegations that Amber has raised against Johnny, and he completely corroborates Johnny's recollection of the events on the Boston flight on the 24th of May 2014. Basically, the story is that Johnny was peacefully sketching in his notebook and Amber was the one who was lecturing him and becoming aggressive with him, and Johnny did not engage her the entire time. At one point, she got up and Johnny playfully tried to tap her on her bottom with his shoe, but he never made contact. Amber flipped out and started telling everyone on the flight, "Did you see him kick me?" And at that point, Stephen and Jerry Judge, may he rest in peace, who was a former member of Johnny's security team, intervened to calm Amber down, and Johnny took a pillow and locked himself up in the bathroom for the rest of the flight, where he slept on the floor, all to avoid any further confrontation with Amber. So this account is consistent between Johnny and Stephen. However, a few issues did arise during Stephen's testimony during the trial. The first issue arose with Stephen's recollection of Johnny's demeanor on the flight, namely that he was peacefully sketching in his notebook. The defense read out a text message that Johnny sent to Paul Bettany, who was a very good friend of his, regarding his alcohol and drug consumption prior to this flight. The text reads, "I'm going to properly stop the booze thing, darling. Drank all night before I picked Amber up to fly to LA this past Sunday. Ugly, mate. No food for days, powders, cocaine, half a bottle of whiskey, 1,000 Red Bulls and vodkas, pills, 2 bottles of champers on the plane. What do you get? An angry aggro Indian in a fucking blackout, screaming obscenities and insulting any fuck who got near." So the defense used this text message and pointed out to Stephen that this does not in any way coincide with his description of Johnny's behavior on the flight, and the judge agreed with that. However, to Stephen's credit, he agreed that on the face of it, it looks like it's not consistent, but he stood by his recollection. He said, "I know what I saw, regardless of what this text message says." Another major hole that was poked in Stephen's testimony was the text exchange that took place between him and Amber after the trip, after the flight. We refer to these text messages in my other videos, my rebuttal of Amber Heard's evidence videos. But to summarize what went on, basically Stephen was apologizing to Amber for Johnny's behavior on the flight. And specifically, he said, "When I told him he kicked you, he cried." Now, of course, you can see how that is incredibly damning to both Stephen and Johnny, who both maintained that Johnny never kicked Amber and did not display any other violent or abusive behavior on that flight. Stephen's explanation was that he was directed by Johnny to mollify Amber, to calm her down, to placate her, and to use her own terminology to avoid angering her. Stephen maintained his stance that Johnny was merely being playful when he tried to tap Amber on the bottom, and that he never kicked her despite using that word just to keep her happy. The judge asked him, well, if Johnny was being playful, why not just tell her that? To which Stephen responded, well, Amber wouldn't have taken that very well. She would have been angered by that because she would see that as a contradiction of what she's saying. So Stephen explained he hates confrontation. He's a victim of domestic violence himself, and he just wanted the problem to go away. So as one would do with a child, you kind of just nod your head and go, yes, sweetie, that's what happened. Now calm down. Once again, Mr. Sherborne comes in and saves the day with his re-examination. He used text messages that were exchanged between Johnny and Stephen as an example of how colorful and exaggerated Johnny's language can be in his text messages. At one point during a text exchange between Johnny and Stephen, Johnny says that he woke up to hookers and animals in his room and that he had to slaughter the animals for sustenance. Now, of course, that was a joke and not literal in any sense. So Mr. Sherborne used that text message as a way of showing the court that even if Johnny told Paul Bettany that he was ugly and he was aggressive and all that colorful language he used, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true and literal. That's just Johnny's way of texting people. Now, I'm not gonna lie, the text that Johnny sent to Paul is damaging. It's not the best thing. But I think Mr. Sherborne's tactic does have the potential to close up that hole that was poked by the defense. I'm not saying it's 100% successful tactic because the judge might not necessarily think that the Paul Bettany text was colorful and exaggerated. He might use that as evidence that Johnny was indeed a monster and abusive on the flight, but it does help to give the judge pause, to make him reconsider. Well, what if Johnny was being colorful and exaggerated in that text message? And that's all it takes with cases. As a good lawyer, you need to plant that seed of doubt in the mind of the decision maker. So may it be the jury or, as in this case, the judge. Make them doubt the evidence that is being presented before them by the opposing side, and that may be just enough for them to decide that the standard of proof has not been satisfied. Edward White, who is Johnny Depp's accountant, also testified regarding the 21st of April 2016 when Johnny was late to Amber's 30th birthday party because he was in a meeting with Edward regarding his disastrous finances at the time. I'm not going to go into any detail in terms of Edward's evidence. All I'm going to say is that he stated that Johnny was definitely not drunk, he was sharp, he was clear, he was in a business meeting, so he was professional, and he wasn't inebriated in any way, as Amber claims he was. And this is important because the business meeting actually took place right before Johnny went to Amber's party. So it wasn't like it took place during the day and Johnny had plenty of time to consume drugs and alcohol and alter his behavior. Now again, this is another witness that we have extensively talked about and looked at her evidence in my rebuttal of Amber's evidence video, I believe part 2. So for those of you who don't know, Mrs. Sparza owned the concierge that was operating at the Eastern Columbia building where Amber and Johnny both lived when they were together. Mrs. Sparza and her staff members have come across Amber on multiple occasions, and specifically during the week leading up to the 27th of May 2016 when Amber took out a restraining order against Johnny. No matter what was thrown her way by the defense, she maintained that Amber was absolutely makeup and bruise free between the period of the 22nd of May 2016 up until the 27th of May 2016 when she suddenly, out of the blue, had a bruise on her right cheek. What I really liked about Mrs. Sparza is that she demonstrated her impartiality by stating that she actually liked Amber and thought that she was lovely. This was reiterated by Mr. Sherborne during his re-examination of Mrs. Sparza to demonstrate to the court again that Mrs. Sparza has no reason to be nasty towards Amber or to wish her any ill will. She's just here relaying the truth with no agenda whatsoever. The defense showed Mrs. Sparza a photograph of Amber that was allegedly taken on the 21st of May 2016, and Ms. Wass pointed out a red mark that was apparently on Amber's cheek. And Mrs. Sparza conceded that, yeah, it looks like there's something in the photo, but she again maintained that I saw her in person. I am a woman. I know when a woman is wearing makeup or not, and Amber was absolutely makeup free. She even mentioned how she specifically talked about Amber's skin with Amber. So she commented on how beautiful Amber's skin is and wanted to know what she was using, and Amber responded with some kind of moisturizer. So not a hint of makeup. And Miss Sparza really made it clear that she knows when a woman is wearing makeup or not, simply by virtue of being a woman herself. So overall, a great witness, did not waver, was completely consistent, demonstrated impartiality, and even so, Mr. Sherborne still attempted to really bolster her credibility in the eyes of the judge and questioned her on how close she was when she was speaking to Amber during those face-to-face interactions. And Mrs. Sparza made it very clear that she was incredibly close to Amber, about arm's length, and the surroundings were always very well lit. All right, second last witness for this video, Malcolm Connolly, who is Johnny Depp's security guard. He worked for Johnny for 16 years, which obviously you will notice that Miss Wass always latches on to this fact that you're loyal to your employer, aren't you? You know, you would never throw Johnny under the bus because you depend on him for your livelihood. You'll notice this is her MO, or modus operandi. It's just what she does. Mr. Connolly was present in Australia in March 2015 when Johnny's finger was severely injured during the course of a fight with Amber. He stated in his testimony and in his written statement that one of the first things that Johnny said to him when he was called over by Jerry Judge to extract Johnny from the situation was that Amber was responsible for cutting the tip of Johnny's finger off. And Malcolm was in fact one of the people who was coming up with ideas to cover up for Amber and to make it look like the entire incident was an accident. Mr. Connolly also stated that he clearly saw the red mark on Johnny's cheek where Amber had extinguished or put out a cigarette. Most importantly, Malcolm states that he observed Amber and her arms were bare and there were absolutely no scratches, no bruises, no hint whatsoever of any injuries to her face or her arms. He testified that she was screaming that she loved Johnny and that he was a coward for leaving. Now, mind you, she's alleging that she was held as a hostage for 3 days at this point. And yet she was yelling at Johnny that he was a coward for leaving. Now, again, the defense does try to poke a hole in Mr. Connolly's testimony. They play back the recording of Jerry Judge in which he can be heard saying that the scratches on Amber's left arm are very obviously self-inflicted and that he's seen them before on other people, not necessarily on Amber. Now, I've played this entire recording in my rebuttal videos, so again, if you want to listen to them, you can go ahead and check them out. But Mr. Connolly maintains his position that he didn't see any bruises or cuts or scratches on Amber's arms, and that Jerry Judge actually arrived at the property after Mr. Connolly and Johnny left. So he's implying basically, without directly going out and saying it, which is very clever because you're not meant to speculate as a witness, he's saying that at some point after Mr. Connolly and Johnny left and before Jerry Judge arrived, Amber could have scratched her arm, which is a very viable explanation as to why he didn't see any scratches but Jerry Judge did. Mr. Connolly also testified that he was a prison guard for 2 years and that he was trained in extraction, pacifying, identifying bullying behavior, and bruising patterns. When questioned about why Johnny would cover up for Amber if she was indeed the one who severed his finger, he explained that protecting the abuser is a very common pattern of behavior when it comes to victims of abuse. Mr. Connolly was also questioned on the 2015 Southeast Asian train journey that Amber and Johnny took for their honeymoon. Now, Amber alleges a huge fight broke out and that she was physically assaulted by Johnny during that train ride. And Mr. Connolly testified that he didn't see any signs or hints of a fight or of any bruising or injuries on Amber, and that she never complained to him of anything. The defense tried to discredit him by telling him that he wasn't in the same cabin, to which he clarified, no, he wasn't, but he was in the same carriage. So the defense tried to make it look like either Mr. Connolly couldn't hear the argument that broke out because he wasn't in the same cabin, or if he heard it by virtue of being in the same carriage, he was just covering for his boss. Mr. Sherborne re-examined Mr. Connolly as well in another attempt to make his witness look good in the eyes of the judge. During the re-examination, Mr. Connolly was able to confirm to the court that Amber was indeed the one who was physically violent towards Johnny throughout the course of their relationship, and that he had never seen Johnny lay a finger on her. He even went as far as to say that he would never tolerate a man hitting a woman, no matter who that man was, even if that man was the Pope. He also clarified to the court that he didn't solely rely on Johnny as a source of income, and that he had other jobs and other sources of income that could sustain him. So overall, excellent witness, stood his ground, stuck to his evidence, and did not falter under the intense cross-examination of the defendants. He also exhibited impartiality by stating that he thought that Amber was polite and nice, and he liked her and didn't personally have anything against her while he was working for both her and Johnny during the course of their relationship. All right, final witness for this video, Tara Roberts, who is the estate manager of Johnny's property or Johnny's Island in the Bahamas. So she's worked for Johnny since December 2008, and she maintains that she has never seen Johnny behave violently or aggressively towards Amber or anyone throughout the entire time of her knowing him. Ms. Roberts states that when the couple visited the island in December of 2015 for Christmas and New Year's, it became clear to Ms. Roberts that Amber was a thrower, so she threw things at Johnny a lot and was physically abusive towards him. Ms. Roberts also stated that Amber was incredibly possessive and overbearing and wanted to be involved in every conversation that Johnny had with anyone, wanted to be around him all the time, and that Johnny was a shadow of his former self. With regards to Amber's allegation of a fight and a broken door in August of 2014, Ms. Roberts testifies that there was no damage to the property whatsoever, and that if there was, she would have known about it because she was the estate manager. She also testified that on the 29th of December 2015, a huge fight broke out between Amber and Johnny, in which Amber was screaming at him, insulting him, and it got so bad at one point that Ms. Roberts called Johnny's sister Christy, who told her to intervene, which she did. And when she came to intervene, she witnessed Amber clawing and pulling and yanking and hitting Johnny. And all he did was just stand there and tell her to stop and to leave him alone. According to Ms. Roberts, not once did Johnny physically retaliate in any way. Ms. Roberts managed to extract Johnny out of the situation and took him to a cafe where she saw that he had a gash across the bridge of his nose, which he explained was caused when Amber threw a can of lacquer thinner at his face. As for Amber, Ms. Roberts testified that she was usually makeup-free on the island, and on this incident, she was makeup-free the entire time, and there were no injuries or any visible marks on Amber's face or body whatsoever. As ever, the defense tried to paint out Ms. Roberts as biased and as someone who depended on Johnny for her livelihood. Ms. Roberts denied this and stated that she had other sources of income should she ever lose her job with Johnny. The defense really didn't want to let this point go. They were really adamant on showing the court that Ms. Roberts was covering for Johnny because it was in her interest to do so. They even used the infamous TMZ video where Johnny was depicted slamming and kicking cabinet doors, but they used that to discredit her and say, well, you said he's not an aggressive and violent person, then what is this that you see in the video? This was a sticky point because Ms. Roberts concedes that this was a side to Johnny that she was never privy to. So in the eyes of the court, it looked like Johnny did have two sides to him and he only presented the nice side in public, whereas in private, the monster came out. The defense also showed Miss Roberts a photo of Amber that was allegedly taken during Christmas on the island, in which she had a bruising under both eyes. Miss Roberts stuck to her evidence and maintained her position of not ever seeing Amber looking like this, specifically during that time period. Now, this was a situation that did call for re-examination to re-establish credibility, and Mr. Sherborne did not disappoint. Firstly, he talked to Miss Roberts about the TMZ video, and he directed her to what she said in her statement, which was she had never seen Johnny behave violently or aggressively towards Amber or anyone. So he stressed on the fact that she said anyone, so a human being is the obvious implication here. The defense very poorly tried to make an argument that Johnny is an abusive person, even to humans, purely based on the fact that he was taking his anger out on inanimate objects. And Mr. Sherborne was very quick to point out that Miss Roberts said he'd never been aggressive or violent towards people, not kitchen cabinets. So her credibility was immediately reestablished by making this very important distinction. That's it for this video. So the overall position right now is Johnny's side is doing incredibly well. They have very good witnesses, very consistent, which is a great sign of credibility and truthfulness. Liars usually forget what they say, they jump all around, they change facts and details here and there. So far, so good for Johnny and his legal team. We're gonna start off part 2 with a testimony of Samantha McMillan, who, if you'll remember, is Amber's stylist and who testified to not seeing any injuries on Amber at relevant dates. As always, do let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think the evidence is strong? And I will be linking all the transcripts and everything in the description box, so by all means, read them in detail if you wish to do so. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I will catch you in a future video.